I am so excited to have Bakari Sellers with us today. He is an attorney, a political commentator, a politician, an activist, now an author. He received his undergraduate degree with a degree in African American Studies at Morehouse College, and he's representing today. He's got on his sweatshirt. He was the elected student body president at Morehouse. He received his JD degree at USC, and as a native South Carolinian, I know that means the University of South Carolina. At 22, while still in law school, he defeated a 26-year incumbent to become the youngest member of the South Carolina State Legislature and the youngest African-American elected official in the nation. He has so many accolades, including being on Time's 40 Under 40 list, Root's 100 Most Influential African Americans list. He practices law with the Strawn Law Firm, and many of us know him from his commentary on CNN, where he has covered many significant events, such as the massacre at Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston, the Confederate flag being removed from the South Carolina Capitol grounds, election night in 2016, and most recently, the murder of George Floyd. On May 28th at about 6 a.m., I emailed him in between takes on CNN, and I said, will you come to our law school? I really want our students to hear your voice. And within 5 minutes, he said yes. So I am so grateful for him being willing to be with us. And he comes from a legacy of leadership. His father, Cleveland Sellers, was a leader in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, who was wrongfully convicted and jailed for events in the 1968 Orangeburg Massacre, where 3 students were killed by state troopers. It took 25 years for him to be pardoned by that, but he is a very accomplished man, including an educator who served as president of Voorhees College. Mr. Sellers, thank you for being with us today. We're so excited to hear your views and to be able to interact with you. I will turn the program over to you now. Thank you.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you. I am from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we had 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And my mom and dad would always say that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words thank you. And they're not nearly said enough. And so, Darby, these conversations that are so important to have in this country often start with a handout of outreach. And I've always been a fan of the law school there. And appreciate the work that you all do, cranking out amazing individuals. And so I just wanted to be a part of this program. And I'm sorry we couldn't make it work last week, but I'm glad we're able to make it this week. To my Spelman sister up there in one of these boxes, I wish I was there with you representing the AUC all around the world. Dean Luma, she's been on mute this entire time, so we'll have a chat afterwards. There she is. Okay. To everyone who's come out, in the words of the great American poet, Sean Carter, also known as Jay-Z, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here today. And so I'm grateful. It's difficult giving remarks sitting from your desk and giving a speech sitting from your desk, but it's so important. And there's some things that I wanted to share with you today. And during this moment, I'm oftentimes think about King's I Have a Dream speech, but I don't get caught up in the rhythmic cadence of I have a dream that one day we shall. I think about the most important part of that speech in which he talks about the fierce urgency of now. And I want to talk just momentarily about that fierce urgency of this moment. I think that we all recognize that we're in a seminal moment in this country's history. Whenever you have everyone from Ben & Jerry's to Peloton to George W. Bush to Mitt Romney. I'm a Swiftie. I got in trouble on TV the other day because I said that Red was a better album than 1989 and people wanted to fight me over that, but that's actually very true. Taylor Swift coming out and saying things, Carson Wentz. And so we're on the brink of a moment. But I want to remind people that we've been here before. My father is a part of what's called the Emmett Till generation. And I know that many of you all have seen the picture. If you haven't, just pull up Google on your browser and go and pull up the picture of Emmett Till's brutally beaten face. He was beaten so bad that there were no bones in his face, and he was thrown in the bottom of the Mississippi. My father always says that Emmett Till represented so much because he was just one of the bodies found and represented all those other bodies that would go unfound in the bottom of the Mississippi. It was 1955, and Mamie Till had an open casket so the world could see what racism and hate and bigotry had done to her son. And so that picture actually made it in Ebony magazine. And my father tore off that picture and folded it up and put it in his wallet and helped spur his activism. The country, the world was galvanized after watching that picture of Emmett Till. It created a whole new protest movement. And then we had the Edmund Pettus Bridge, where John Lewis was beaten and many were beaten and the water hose and the dogs came out. We commemorate that march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge often. And the country, the world was galvanized. They had never seen such brutality against Black folk. And we missed that moment. And then we had 1968. This year, people have asked me what this year is like, and I tell them that this is like 1918 meets 1968 with a little bit of 1928 mixed in it. I mean, we wanted a reality show president. Now we're all on Survivor. That's kind of what it feels like. You had the great pandemic of 1918. You had the unrest of 1968 and a depression like 1928, 29. The unrest that I talk about in 68, though, is unique to this country. Because February 8th, you had the Orangeburg Massacre, which I'll talk about briefly. In April 4th of 68, you had the assassination of King. In June of that year, you had the assassination of RFK. And you had soldiers coming back home from war into what they felt, and what accurately so, was an unjust country. You know, my biggest problem with Drew Brees is, and I digress, talking about Drew Brees, my biggest problem with Drew Brees' comments weren't the ignorance about the protest movement that we're in, but my biggest problem was how he forgot that there were Black soldiers as well who went and fought for our freedom. And not only did they fight for our freedom and do they fight for our freedom, but many times they come back home to an America that's unjust. And my father, during that time, my father was born in 1944. 1944. He was 10 years old when Emmett was killed. That helped spur his activism, just like many of you all were spurred by Michael Brown, or Trayvon, or Tamir, or Eric, or Alton. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, or Sandra. And he began to lead these protests and movements in Little Denmark, South Carolina. And my grandparents were middle class. And they felt not only some sort of way about his security, but they also felt uncomfortable about their economic security with this young rabble-rouser they had. And they sent him off to Howard University. Now that's funny and ironic, because if you want a child to get out of the movement, the last place you send that child is to an HBCU, particularly to Howard University. And when he got to Howard, again, ironically enough, his roommate was none other than Stokely Carmichael. Now, Stokely graduated from Howard. Then he convinced my father to drop out of school. My father did. My father dropped out of school and became a part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, making a whopping $8 a week. That's how much they got paid. And his first mission was to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi. Now, I'm gonna put everybody on. I don't know how many of you all have ever been to Philadelphia, Mississippi, but his first mission was to go to Philadelphia, Mississippi to look for the bodies of Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney. They were found behind the home of one of the local sheriff's deputies and ministers in the town. That was his first indoctrination into the movement. He became national field director for SNCC and eventually became involved in the most deadly civil rights demonstration this country's ever seen. On February 6, 1968, the students at South Carolina State College, as it was known at the time, decided they were going to protest what the history books call the last vestige of discrimination, Jim Crow's final hiding place. It was a small whites-only bowling alley. What was supposed to happen was 3 students were supposed to go in and take a seat or kneel, and they were going to get arrested, and they were going to go fight these injustices in the court of law. But when they went down, they were met with law enforcement. They were met with city police and state troopers. And it sits in a right angle. It's tucked back in the right angle. And as the students went down, they began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns. And then city police and state troopers began to surround the students. And as the students began to chant and get louder, the city police began to press up against the students pressed up against the glass, and then the glass broke. And when the glass broke, all hell broke loose. The city police and state troopers beat many of the students, but they beat them not with normal police batons, but they beat them with batons that were about this long, and at the end they had these leather rawhide whips. Mr. Stroman, who's still in Orangeburg today, tells a story about two state troopers holding a young lady while another one beat her. And the students, they had to go back to their campus and heal not only their physical wounds, but their emotional wounds and mental wounds as well. And then came February 7th, 1968. And I think the saying is, tension was so thick you can cut it with a knife. That's like the old folks saying. But nothing happened. And then came February 8th of 68, when the students went back down to the bowling alley. This time when state troopers came, they got the right idea. They went back to their campus. They went back to their campus. It's important I tell you, they went back to their campus. And it was February, so it was cool, not cold. It was dark, and the students built this huge bonfire. And as they built this bonfire, they again began to clap and chant and sing protest hymns, but the students did not foresee what would happen next. They did not foresee that Highway Patrol would line up along the embankment in front of their beloved campus. They did not foresee that they would close ranks like they did. They did not foresee that they would have shotguns that were loaded with deadly double-aught buckshots or the same bullets we used to hunt deer. And for 8 seconds, shots were fired into the group of students. It killed 3, Henry Smith, Samuel Hammond, and Delano Middleton, and it wounded another 28. My father was shot that night. He went to the infirmary. They told him there was nothing they could do for him there. He had to go to the hospital. When he got to the hospital, he was pointed out by the only Black sheriff's deputy in Orangeburg County at the time, and he was arrested. He was arrested and charged with 5 felony counts, looking at a maximum of 75 years in prison. His bond was denied. And when his bond was denied, he was housed on death row. His bond was later granted a few weeks later at $50,000, which was a whole hell of a lot of money in 1968. In between the time of his trial and February 8th of 68, all the officers who fired shots into the group of students, there are 2 little random, like, legal facts. This was the first time that federal civil rights charges had been brought against law enforcement for their interactions with Black folk. But they were all charged and they were all found not guilty. My father went to trial. The lead investigator said that he had misplaced the evidence because the trial was not until 72, 73. But he himself was an eyewitness, not on the night of the 8th, but on the night of the 6th. And he witnessed my father stand on top of a fire truck, light a Bic, and say, "Burn, baby, burn," until my dad's indictment at trial was backdated from February 8th to February 6th. And he was charged, tried, and convicted of rioting. And he became the first and only one-man riot in the history of this country. On that night, injustice had left mothers without their sons. It left the pages of my state's history stained red with blood. And it left my big sister born without her father. My sister's name is Nosizwe. All of our names are Swahili, but her name is Nosizwe. Her middle name is Abademe, and it means born while father is away. There's this really cool picture of my mom and dad. My dad's afro is bigger than mine. It's like this big. And my mom's afro is bigger than his. And they're sitting on the jailhouse yard. And my father is holding his oldest child, my big sister, for the first time, feeding her a bottle. And they had the little Polaroid camera, you know, the one that you have to kind of shake. They gave it to an inmate who took the picture. And so the first time that my father was able to interact with his own child was on the prison yard. And so that story is one bookend of my life. And part of the tragedy is not, you know, my father being shot or going to prison. The greatest tragedy is just the history books are written and omit the Orangeburg Massacre. People know about Kent State, mainly because white kids died. But people don't know about Orangeburg. And I want to make sure that their lives are not in vain. So I had this really unique idea. I challenge you all. I can't wait to see which one of you all, current students or new admitted students, do this. But let me actually say I don't recommend you do it either. But my first year of law school, I came downstairs I told my mom and dad I was going to run for the South Carolina State House of Representatives. My mom said she'd vote for me. My dad said he'd think about it. I had to go out and I knocked on 2,600 doors, which, let me pause, because y'all from the city and city folk don't know what it means to knock on doors. We don't have those buildings where people live on top of each other. Where I'm from, you knock on a door, you drive a mile, and you knock on another door, right? So we knocked on 2,600 doors, went to over 55 churches. And on June 13, 2006, from the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, I became the youngest state legislator in the country and the youngest Black elected official in these United States. And so it's pretty cool how history trolls people sometimes, how my father went to prison for being an outside agitator, which I hate those words. And then his son ended up becoming a legislator in the same state. And I write about it in My Vanishing Country at length. And I write about the steps I took to run and the pain and trauma associated with being a child of the movement, because I grew up as a product of the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And my village was so unique because my village consisted of people like Marion Barry, Kathleen Cleaver, Julian Bond, Stokely Carmichael. Stokely and my dad were best friends. And I named my son Stokely. So every time I yell Stokely, which is a lot now because he's 17 months and he climbs on everything. But I just feel some sort of power just is in the name. And that was my upbringing, being a child of the movement, having these conversations about organizing. And, my father his first marriage was performed by none other than Dr. King in the basement of a church. And Willie Ricks, who this is going to be on Jeopardy one day. Willie Ricks is the one who actually coined the phrase Black Power, all right? Stokely said it in Greenwood, Mississippi, but Willie was the one who actually came up with the phrase. And Black Power is not meant to terrify white people. Black Power actually means economic power. It means political power. It means self-sustaining and being able to have that power structurally to lift up your communities. And so on one end of my life, you had this tragedy of Orangeburg. And I write about this in the book, and you go all the way through. And then on the other end, 5 years ago this month, I was at a fundraiser for a young lady named Hillary Clinton, who's a good friend of mine. That's how you name drop casually. And we were in Charleston, South Carolina, and all the media was there. Because not only was Hillary in town, but you also had like Marco Rubio and Rick Santorum. You had all the Republican candidates running for president too. I'll never forget it. We were at this fundraiser, and I see my friend Steve Benjamin, who's the mayor of Columbia. And by this time, I had just run for lieutenant governor. And as you all probably know, I'm speaking to y'all today because I lost that race. Let's not relive those moments. So I was trying to figure out what I was going to do in my life. I didn't quite know what I was going to do. And whenever you're in the presence of a top-level Secret Service protectee, like Hillary, whenever you're in the ring, they have to leave before you can leave. I'm sure you guys have been in environments like that, but you realize they're like, everybody wait, let them leave the premises. So Hillary left. And finally I see Steve and I'm like, man, let me hop in my car and follow y'all, because you got the police driving you, so we can get back home pretty quick. It's about an hour and a half between Charleston and Columbia. And so we pull out, we hop on. As we get on the highway, I see more police pass me than I've ever seen in my entire life. I'm talking about like law enforcement, like small tanks, cars, everything just flying past me. And I'm like, what's going on? And so I go to the 24-hour news source, which is the Twitter. And I pull up Twitter and they say, there was a shooting at Mother Emanuel. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. That's a block from where I was. And one of my good friends calls me and says they shot up Mother Emanuel. I'm like, who would shoot up Mother Emanuel? And so I make it back home and I find out that my good friend Clemente Pinckney, who Clem's a dope individual. Clem was a state senator, and he was the youngest state senator when he got elected. He was 25, and when I got elected, I was 21, 22. So he talked to me a lot, and our districts overlapped. So he was a senator for part of my House district, and we used to chat all the time. One of my last events when I was running for lieutenant governor was actually not at Mother Emanuel, but another church that he had in Walterboro. We had a fish fry. And Clem was the only one who made it to the hospital alive. He fought till his last breath. I tell people that he went out the way that I would think Clem would. You know, there was a straggly white boy that none of them had ever seen before, came to their door, and they let him in to Bible study. They had an entire Bible study for a full hour. They worshiped and prayed with him. And Clem didn't sit him on the other side of the church. It was 12 in a circle. Whenever you come to Charleston, let me know. I'll take you guys to get something to eat and something to drink, and I'll take you through Mother Emanuel. But it was 12 in a circle. And they were sitting down, and Clem sat Dylan Roof right beside him. They prayed, they worshiped, they learned. It was Bible study. You know, where Black folk are on Wednesday night, they go to Bible study. And as they gave their final prayer, the benediction, before they went out into the world, Dylan opened fire and shot Clem in the neck and shot a few others, 9 others to be exact. He stood over Polly Shepherd and told her that he was going to let her live so that there was somebody to tell the story. And then Dylan ran away, got arrested, and went and got Burger King. But that's a random factoid. And so I share that story about Mother Emanuel because that was a pain that I had never felt before, losing a friend that way. I went home, got on, you know, everybody was calling me to do TV. I was drinking Jameson, just pounding Jameson and doing these interviews on WIS. I looked at my wife and said, I'm going to Charleston tomorrow. I just packed a bag and went back down to Charleston. Stayed there and tried to give a voice to the voiceless and tried to uplift those people. And it's hard, especially during this time, because Clem's girls, you know, they don't have the opportunity to cook their Father's Day breakfast. And so I got a phone call after doing this week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz hosted. It was a private number. I picked it up, and it was Rebecca Cutler from CNN offering me a job. She said, we've been watching you for a while. And it was funny because you had to be prepared for any opportunity in his life. And I was just trying to give Clem a voice. And CNN wanted me to be able to give that voice to the entire world. And it was pretty cool. They paid me $15,000 for the rest of the year, so I didn't get a whole lot of money. I said, give me 35, and they said, we got 15. I said, give me 25. They said, we got 15. So my negotiating skills weren't the best in the world. But I think about Clem a lot, especially when I'm on TV. And so I'll share with you all this as we open it up for questions, because one of the most important things that I remind folk is that this moment that we're in is not about George Floyd. This moment that we're in is about George, Breonna, David McAtee. It's about Ahmaud Arbery. It's about years of systemic oppression and institutionalized racism that's boiling over into the streets. And I just find it to be the height of irony that we had to everybody stay at home. There'd be no sports, no concerts, no nothing for people in the world to say, oh, wait a minute, it's racism out here. Like, we had to peace be still. There would be no distractions for us to finally address one of the major issues we have in this country. But the biggest problem I have is that I'm 35 and my father is 75. And from Emmett to Jimmy Lee Jackson, to Medgar, to the 16th Street Baptist Church, to me having Breonna, Ahmaud, the Charleston Massacre. Although he's 75 and I'm 35, we are having too many of the same shared experiences. And so my job for my young kids is to break that cycle. So maybe one day they can be free. So with that, I think Professor MC is asking the questions, or Dean Luma is facilitating them. So we'll ask and answer as many questions. I'm only 35 years old. I haven't been in politics yet long enough to learn how to lie to you. So ask me whatever you want to know.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. Sellers. I want to say that I read your book, My Vanishing Country, in one sitting, and it captivated me and it touched me. There's so many rich things to talk about. We have so little time. But I want to jump right in and talk about something that you wrote. You said, because Black folk were stripped of everything, we have to rebuild our communities mentally, physically, spiritually, and economically. So the most powerful thing we can do, and the way I live my life, is to be an example. Could you talk a little bit about the responsibilities and burdens of being an example?
Well, yeah, I think I talk about the burdens in the chapter called Anxiety. I coined it a Black man's superpower. I was on with Iyanla Van Zant as she was fixing lives. And I did she and Tina Lifford have a podcast I was on, and I was talking to them about anxiety and how I sometimes get stuck in my head. And she said, it's when you're in your head without adult supervision is how she referred to it. You know, like fundamentally, very fundamentally, you can't teach a kid to be a Black doctor if they've never seen one, right? You can't teach a kid to be a Black lawyer if they've never seen one. And the best example I can give you is Jacob Philadelphia. I'm kind of mad that I can't see but like 3 faces. Can y'all turn y'all videos on? This is pretty weird that everybody just sitting with a dark screen. I want to be able to make sure I'm not boring you guys to death. There you go. Goodness gracious. All right. Okay. Thank you. It's like real people on this call. I felt like I was talking to 3 people in some boxes. This is a family environment. I love it. But Jacob Philadelphia how many people have heard of Jacob Philadelphia? Raise your hand. Anybody? Jacob was 4 years old, and he got casket sharp. Casket sharp to what we say down south, because that's like the best you're going to ever look is your final day. So they call it casket sharp. And Jacob had on a white dress shirt and some slacks, and he got his shoes shined. His parents worked in the White House, and he got a chance to go to the Oval Office and meet Barack Obama. And do you know what Jacob asked Barack? Jacob asked Barack, does your hair feel like mine? And Barack leaned over, and Jacob reached up and touched it. And Pete Souza, who we refer to as the shade god in my profession, I love Pete Souza, follow him on IG. He gives the best shade ever. Captured this image, and it's the greatest image to come out of that White House, either that or the Situation Room for the Bin Laden assassination. And it's a phenomenal picture. You know why it's a phenomenal picture? Because it's an example showing little Black and brown kids around the world that they could be the most powerful man in the world, right? Because their hair feels just like Barack's. And so when I say be an example, I mean that is the number one thing you can do. Like, I know you guys are getting law degrees and being all fancy, and Dean Luma probably got all these letters behind her name too and all this other stuff, right? But like, you can go back home and you can show the people who are not as blessed and not as fortunate as you are. You can help them order their steps as well. And for me, I'm from a very poor area. Like, we had to do this thing because virtual learning, I think people take for granted virtual learning. Like, you got to have like broadband, like you got to actually be able to learn virtually, like just like have the technical capacity. And so where I'm from, we went and we have school buses that have Wi-Fi. And so we went, and every morning we go park school buses out in different neighborhoods so kids can actually learn, right? Where I'm from, we don't have clean water. We don't have potable water. Our systems are dilapidated and falling apart. It's called the corridor of shame, and kids go to school where their heating and air don't work. Their infrastructure is falling apart. We lost our hospital in 2010 because we didn't expand Medicaid. I lived in a food desert. Y'all know what food deserts are? Where you can't go 2 and 3 miles, I think is the definition, accurate definition, and get healthy fruits and vegetables and alternatives. And so you have all of these comorbidities and you have all of these preventable diseases. And so you overlay that with the pandemic, and you know the age-old saying that my dad, Cleve Sellers, says, you know, when America gets a cold, Black folk get the flu. Well, America has COVID, so Black folk are dying, right? And those are the systemic injustices that we talk about and that I highlight in My Vanishing Country. But those are the systemic injustices that we have to go back and be an example to help deconstruct. And so I tell people often that with my law degree, I just moved into this office, so that's why all my pictures and stuff are down. Oh, really cool. I'll show you guys this. This is a New York Times piece. It's really big, but I got it. These are all the people that Donald Trump has tweeted about. The New York Times did a special piece. And one of the people that he tweeted about was me. And so I got it framed. So he tweeted about me and then he blocked me. Yeah. So I couldn't even respond. He blocked me. But, you know, being an example is one of the most powerful things you can be. Also, I mean, I know this isn't on topic, but one of the things that I failed to do that I probably should have, because we've been talking about systemic racism and stuff, And I didn't even, Pablo, I like your background back there. I didn't even define what racism is. I know y'all are smart and stuff and have all these degrees, but Stokely Carmichael defined racism the best. He said that if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. But if you have the power to lynch me, then that's my problem. Because racism isn't about people calling you nigger. Racism is about structural and power constructs. And, it's about these systems that we have to talk about, not the sensationalized rhetoric. And so I want people to truly understand that as we're moving through this moment in history. Yes, Professor MC.
So I wanted to bring us back to Orangeburg, because this is where it's kind of in your DNA, kind of what shaped you and brought you to cultural awareness. And I want to talk, we have a question here about violence, and so I kind of want to weave this into the question I had to you about this particular question about Orangeburg, which was, can you talk a little bit about the imagery of the tank being pointed at your father's house in Orangeburg and its relevance to what we're seeing in the movement for Black lives? And to weave in a student question that we have about violence, what about this commentary on the violence or the rioting, but not about the events that brought it about? So if you could talk about that.
Whoever asked that question, it's a good question. I would not challenge you, but while we're at home, go out and read some of King's stuff and watch some of King's videos. I'm not that's usually not something I do. I really don't talk about Dr. King a lot because we've done an effective job of whitewashing Dr. King, and people forget that he was a revolutionary. 1964 was the last Gallup poll they did on him before his death. But President Trump's approval rating today was 38%, which is low. It's usually between 40 and 48. King's approval rating was 32. So I want you all to just to juxtapose that even that Donald Trump had a higher approval rating than people thought of Martin Luther King Jr. during that time. But he did talk about this, and we hear it all the time, the quote that rioting is the language of the unheard. And what I tell people often is, do not tell my people, do not ask for peace, and do not tell my people to get out the street if you're not also asking for justice. Like, people like to say, go home, like stop looting, stop rioting, go home, don't protest, period. Or come back in November. Like, come back in November. Like, at the rate they're killing us, like with Ahmaud, Breonna, David, George, that's in the last 2 months. Like, at that rate, you know how many people are going to die between now and November? Like, we need to have these conversations now about how we're going to change our environment, what culturally we're going to change. We have to have those solutions present now. I don't protest at night. Why? My father was shot at night. Lesson learned. Cleve Sellers gives me good advice. He says that people do under the cover of darkness what they otherwise wouldn't do during the day. And so I talk to DeRay and all my organizers all the time. I'm like, man, I'm with you. But when the sun starts creeping down, I'm going home. Okay. Just little things like that. The violence we see perpetrated, I haven't seen this level of violence. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's never good to have military. It's never good to have National Guard interacting with protesters. It's just, nothing throughout history ever good comes from those moments. And it's as if we haven't learned anything. But again, we're at a seminal moment, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see how we take advantage of that.
So you spoke a little bit about health inequities and just the closing of Bamberg Hospital in 2012. In the book, you didn't touch on it yet in your remarks, but the birth of your twins and your wife's experience with her team of Black women doctors. And, you say health equity equals folks who look like us and listen to us. And I'm wondering, what would this look like in the time of the health pandemic in which we find ourselves?
So I have 3 very unique experiences with our healthcare system. The first is January 7th at 5:28. Stokely was born. 5:33, Sadie was born. By 11 o'clock, my wife was throwing up, passed out. We had 2 nurses in there. It was just she, I, and a lactation specialist. And then my wife, she said, I'm feeling hot. I never forget it. She said, I'm feeling odd, and her eyes like rolled back. And so I had to go out, and these two nurses were moving so slow. I mean, they were moving slow as hell. And they're like, she all right, man, let's take her temperature. It's hot, turn it. I'm like, nah, my wife is sick, something's wrong. And so we pull back the sheets, and it was blood everywhere. And I think they say you have about 9 units of blood in you, and she lost like 7. She was just hemorrhaging. And I knew the doctors she had 3 Black female, it was the whole practice, the whole OBGYN practice was all female, all Black. And we knew them. They were part of our social circle, you know, their AKAs and links and all this other stuff. And I called them. I just FaceTimed them. I mean, I wasn't waiting on the nurse. I was like, look, something's wrong with Ellen. She just passed out. She's throwing up. They're like, all right. They ended up having to call like the crash unit in. Now, mind you, it's me and these 2 little babies, right? And one of the doctors has an 8-year-old daughter, and she just left the garage door open so her neighbor could come over and watch her kid. Her kid was asleep. She left the garage door open and rushed to the hospital. And they came in and they did an ultrasound on her stomach, realized it was just blood everywhere. They had to rush her into emergency surgery. So then I had to do one of y'all know the college prayer? I see some old folk on here who may not know the college prayer, but the young folk know the college prayer. That is, on Saturday morning after you wake up from hitting the bar on Friday night, you say, dear God, if you get me through this moment, I'll never do X, Y, Z again. You know, usually involves like Jack Daniels or something. That's the college prayer. But I was like, dear God, if you get me through this moment, because here I am. They just gave me these little bottles with these nipples. They blocked off the whole floor. My family was stuck downstairs. Nobody was allowed upstairs. And your wife's in emergency surgery, and you have twins. I mean, my brother was calling me. There's a great anecdote, great story about me and my daughter, my 15-year-old daughter, my stepdaughter. Ellen is her mother, and you know just how she lifted me up during this time. It was really, really difficult. The first 36 hours of my children's life, their mother was in ICU. And the unique part about that story is it doesn't matter if you're Serena Williams or Bakari Sellers or you're on Medicaid. African-American maternal health is a serious issue, and it's an issue that crosses socioeconomic level. It's because of the inherent biases we have in this country in our healthcare delivery system, and the fact that, as in most things culturally, Black women's voices are not valued. All right, so that's first. The second thing is, as I told you earlier, I lost my hospital. One of the biggest things that's happening in rural America is you're seeing hospitals close. A lot of it has to do with the fact that in southern states, because we've named it Obamacare, like no one wants to expand Medicaid, which is silly. But hospitals have been unable to sustain themselves. And my hospital shut down. And it's not just an access to care issue, although that's a big issue. When you're thinking legislatively or policy-wise, you also remember that hospitals are economic stimuluses. What does that mean? Because around hospitals, what else do you have? Restaurants, small businesses, you know, florists, pharmacies. When your hospital leaves, not only is it one of your largest employers, but all of those small businesses around you just go away. So not having access to quality care is where I grew up. So not access to care, and then you lay on that African-American maternal health. And then the last thing was at 2 months old, we went to our 2-month checkup, and little Sadie was still a little yellow. And they sent me to get some blood work done. And my pediatrician called me on Saturday. I don't know how many of y'all got kids, but if your pediatrician calls you on the weekend, it ain't never good, all right? My pediatrician called me on Saturday and said, I need to take her to the hospital on Monday to meet with the GI doctor. Hopefully it's just something we can flush out. They went in and diagnosed her with biliary atresia, which is a very rare liver disease. She had a Kasai procedure in March. That's where they go in and they tie your large intestine to your liver to try to get the drainage. And it didn't work. And they put her on the transplant list in May. And for 93 days, my little Sadie was on the liver transplant waiting list. So 93 days, and she's skinny and frail. All she had was this amazing smile, this gummy smile. And she's literally every single day, just your daughter is just dying in front of your eyes. There's nothing you can really do. And on September 1st, she got the gift of life. She got a new liver, and she's doing extremely well now. But I experienced a broken transplant system in this country. that you have to have means, that is very difficult to navigate, and one that's not built on any type of health equity. And so those are three very intimate experiences I've had with our healthcare system, two more personal than the third, but they've made me recommit and be more intentional and purposeful in the way that I approach healthcare and healthcare policy.
So we have two related questions from students here about police department. So I'll try to tie them together as best as I can. One deals with defunding the police, and is that the person who's asking the question wants to know, do you see it as a viable strategy? And the other is about the Minneapolis Police Department in particular. It says, we recently saw the Minneapolis Police Department dismantle. Is this something we should be doing nationwide?
So Democrats are really bad with language. Like, we suck at messaging. We're like, first of all, we're proverbial bedwetters, which just never does. I mean, it's like an emotional roller coaster to be a Democrat going into an election, always. And we really are bad with our verbiage. I was trying to explain this morning what defund the police meant. And whenever you say defund the police, people think they're going to dial 911 and ain't nobody going to show up. When in all actuality, they mean just go line by line and finding where you can redirect resources to, summer youth programs, summer jobs programs, public school education, libraries, things that are more preventative on the front end than military and tactical gear. Even in Camden, New Jersey, that's what most people point to, where they actually disbanded the police, sort of, but they still have a law enforcement presence there. They actually did some consolidation, but murders went down 50% and all these other things. And so that is the conversation that people are having. Defund the police is not a good political slogan. And usually the nuance of the message gets lost, right? We're not a very nuanced society. So you can't put it in 240 characters. It's really not. I mean, I can't explain defund the police in one tweet. There are people who are better than I can, who can do it, probably do it. I'm just telling you what I can and can't do. But I like the way that people are being intentional about the way they're looking at policing. I wrote an op-ed piece. I think that's Darby up there just cranking out the links. She can probably find it. It's on CNN.com. And I called for some reforms that I wanted to see in our police departments, like a nationalized database of misconduct. Because right now you can be fired from the Chicago Police Department and go to Aurora and get hired as police chief, right? Because there's no database. We need there you go, look at that. Darby's on point. We need standardized use of force training and guidelines. They don't teach de-escalation everywhere. They should. They teach chokehold, but they don't teach de-escalation. We need to limit qualified immunity. Lawyers, limit qualified immunity. Somebody should write their paper on that. We need to lower the standard to bring federal civil rights criminal charges against law enforcement. The standard, in the words of Eric Holder, the standard is too damn high. That's why you didn't see charges brought in the Eric Gardner case. That and Barack Obama was tepid on issues of Black Lives Matter, but I digress. And so, we have to be constructive and put forth solutions. And those are some of the ones that I put forth in that piece right there.
So you say that relationships, I love the way you define relationships, is making sure that people know that you see them. And can you pass some wisdom along to our students about how to build meaningful relationships in their student organizations, as student organization leaders, as law students, and as new lawyers? How do they translate to people that they see them and that they're working for them and with them, more importantly?
So this profession that we chose is the most amazing profession in the entire world, because literally every single day we get to change the fabric of a community and we get to help people, right? We're like on the front lines of the word justice, which I still believe in, and I'm assuming y'all do, right? But we also need to retain our humility. and we need to stay grounded in the work that we do. And one of the things that I want, I always tell people that relationships are the most valuable currency you have in politics and law. And it's not about relationships with the other people who go to law school with you per se, but it's how you treat the lady who comes in there and cleans up while you're still in the building late at night studying. It's about the cafeteria worker who takes care of you, who, acknowledging them and saying, how are you doing? Instead of just being on your phone or tweeting or like TikToking, like actually looking them in the eye and say, what's up? Are you doing well today? Are you doing good today? I mean, I see you is what I try to do with people every day. I want people to know that I literally see them every day. And so taking a moment to speak to people, showing that you have some humility while you're on this quest for justice. I think if we get that in the habit of it now and while you're in law school, it'll make you that much more of a better attorney. Those traits come off in jury boxes. I love being in front of a jury. There's nothing like being in front of a jury. I always start off with, I'm from the big city of Denmark, 3 stoplights and a blinking light, and the juries eat it up. They love it. They're like, oh, you just a country boy? Like, yeah, I am. I am the trial lawyer in my office. Let me not say that too loud because a couple of them think they trial lawyers. But in every trial, civil and criminal that we do, they come and I get a chance to go because it's just, there's no greater feeling. I actually did a double murder case in December. It was a really, really bad case, but of course I got a guilty but mentally ill verdict to come back from the jury. It was the first one that we've had in South Carolina in a jury trial case. And I got our first motion to change venue done in South Carolina in a criminal case because those are very, very rare. One of the witnesses was the solicitor in that area, and I didn't want him to prosecute the case. He did a ride along. I know I'm rambling, but this is pretty cool stuff. He did a ride along. You know how solicitors sometimes do ride along with law enforcement, and they went in to do a drug bust, and he made himself a witness. And so I was like, you can't prosecute the case and be a witness. That just doesn't make sense. They tried to keep it, of course. And my most proud achievement, which is a pretty cool argument. If you just need 27 minutes of your life that you not doing anything else, go argue in front of our state Supreme Court to find our domestic violence laws unconstitutional because they didn't protect same-sex couples. One of my paralegals here was in a relationship and she was getting beat and called the police, and the police were like, we can't even charge your partner with criminal domestic violence because it says man and woman. I was like, what year is this? Oh my God. So she didn't get domestic violence laws afford you other protections, financial protections, everything else. So she couldn't even get, and they escalate, the penalties escalate, and it provides more of a deterrent. She couldn't get any of those protections from domestic violence law. So I had an emergency hearing, went to the Supreme Court and won. And we got our domestic violence laws tossed out and rewritten. So those are some of the successes that I've had, just being able to do those things with my law degree. And I'm so damn proud of them.
Some powerful language you write. Dirt road living is who we are, allowing us to understand early on that life can be slippery, but we figure out how to navigate the unpredictable paths that can go from gentle to muddy and treacherous in minutes. In our pandemic, within the pandemic, COVID-19 and the pandemic of white supremacy, these are the dirt roads that we almost navigate. Is there any advice for how our students can do that as law students and future lawyers? And also, can you talk a little bit about this, where you draw your strength to continue to move forward?
Well, second question is kind of easy. I mean, I don't know if it's strength. I refuse to let people take away my faith and hope. When we came to this country 401 years ago, we were stripped of absolutely everything, but Black folk maintained their hope and strength, and they always had a level of perseverance. And so I try to do that to honor those who came before. So even in the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, when I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, you have to try to keep moving forward. I'd said that being Black in this country is a perpetual state of grief, right? You're always in these stages. Hopefully we can break that cycle and I have these beautiful babies now. So that motivates me to keep going. How do we navigate this time? That's a tough one because this is unlike anything we've ever seen before. Like I told you, 18 meet 68, meet 28. But we have to understand the why. And I got into a decently public spat. Darby, you can find that out there from CNN too, when me and Jerome Adams, who is the US Surgeon General, we got into a public spat after he said, do it for your mima, do it for your abuela, do it for your papa. And I was like, wait a minute, dude. You're like the only Black person in that room. Like, you have to speak truth to power. You're speaking to the entire world. Like, people ain't doing nothing but sitting at home watching press conferences. And you basically gave us the equivalent of Bill Cosby's pound cake speech. You told us to go pull our pants up, right? Have y'all ever seen Bill Cosby's pound cake speech? It's god awful. If you want to know what respectability politics is, it's gonna be weird if somebody looks at your search history and you're searching Bill Cosby. But for this moment, like, go look at Bill Cosby's pound cake speech. It is, it's wild. And that's what I felt from Jerome Adams. And I said that we have to talk about these systemic injustices. That is why Black folk are dying at higher rates. Because if you're drinking dirty water, you're more likely to have cancers. If you're inhaling bad air, you're more likely to have asthma. If you're in a food desert and you're making Kool-Aid stretch, you put a packet of Kool-Aid, and if you're freaky, you take a little cherry and mix it with a little lemonade. That's a trick. And you put your 2 cups of sugar in there, you stretch it out for a week, you're more likely to have diabetes, right? So when the pandemic hits, this is what happens. And, for him not to address that with this platform drove me crazy. So I think that as educated minds, as those who are scholars, we have to be at the forefront of understanding the why. And I'm also challenging all of you all, like, everybody doesn't have to be, like, I wish Tiger Woods would have shut up. Like, you don't have to say something right now. You realize that, right? Like, you don't have to protest that that's not what you want to do. Sometimes you can just read a book. Like, you can make yourself more aware and more conscious. There are conversations that Julie can have that I can't have, right? There are friends that you can go talk to, or Professor Mock can go talk to that, he would be a better messenger to address his friends with these huge blind spots than I would be. And so a lot of times it's just ensuring that we're having these conversations, which are difficult, but extremely healthy and necessary. It's incidental to Trump presidency. This is one of the things, there are 2 books that I want to see written about the Trump presidency. One is a sociology or psychology book, because I want to see how he's able to manipulate people around him so closely that they just become shells of themselves. I think it's phenomenal. I want somebody to write the scholarship and the science behind that. And the other thing is, we're having conversations about race that we wouldn't be having if Hillary Clinton was president of the United States. I think that's more incidental to the president than because of him, but regardless. And so we have to be willing to meet this moment where we are.
We have just 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure that the last voice we hear is of Bakari Sellers. So I have 2 announcements first, and then the last voice you hear will be Bakari Sellers taking us out, wrapping us up. So June 15th at 5 p.m., our alumnus, Tony Ramanucci, who is part of the George Floyd estate legal team, will address the Floyd murder and ways lawyers can find to end structural racism, including police violence. And Mr. Ramanucci is on the call. I saw him earlier, so shout out to him. And June 17th, noon, the UIC John Marshall faculty, group of faculty, will be talking about policing and police brutality with a con law focus. So please look in your inboxes for announcements to those events, and we're going to keep this conversation going. Let me be the first to say thank you, Mr. Sellers, my Morehouse brother, for taking the time out to talk with us today. And do you have any closing remarks of hope, or your prisoner of hope, that you can give us as we end this call?
Look, I am really excited. I was on ESPN First Take this morning, and then I just did a podcast with Bill Simmons, and all that stuff's cool, but I was really more excited about just chatting with you guys today, because, like, don't let anybody tell you, like, that you're, like, future leaders or anything like that. I think that's BS. Don't let anybody tell you that you're, like, the leaders of tomorrow. I think that's BS. I think that you are the leaders of right now. And I think that this moment needs you right now. And so even though you're in law school, or about to be in law school or just graduating or whatever it may be, understand that with your JD, you can do absolutely anything in the world. It opens up so many doors, from the halls of Congress to nonprofits to the CEO suites and all of these other things. But also, you know, center yourself around this quest for justice, which I write a book entitled My Vanishing Country, because the promises of this country, the ideals of this country are vanishing for many poor people, many immigrants, many Black and brown people. And so I'm challenging you all to join us in this fight for justice and equality and truth, and give those words real meaning. And in the words of the, I say that he is the greatest educator of all time, with all due respect to all the educators on the phone. You can be number two, but the greatest educator of all time is Benjamin Elijah Mays. And he says, in all things that you do them so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do them better. That's your challenge and that's your mission. Thank you, guys. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.